Well, welcome everyone to our annual Advent series called Capture the Wonder here at RZAM. My name is Basil McLaren. I'm an adjunct speaker with the RZAM Canadian team. And I'm sorry that we can't be in person together celebrating and fellowshipping at the downtown office in Toronto. I'm coming at you from my home in BC, all the way on the other side of the province. So although we're sad that we can't be together in person, we are thankful that you're joining us here virtually. Now in Advent, we are not only looking back to the first coming of Jesus and the surrounding narrative around the Christmas story, but we're also looking forward and expecting Jesus' return. And so in this Capture the Wonder series, we've been exploring these themes of expectation and waiting and return and Jesus coming, the God of the universe coming in human form, which is what the word incarnation means. And if you missed it, you can go back to Tuesday, the 8th of December, where Logan Gates gave the first kickoff talk in this series called A Christmas Worth Singing About. And today we have Daniel Gilman, our very own itinerant speaker here as RZAM Canada, and he is talking about a pagan Christmas, and it will be a very interesting talk. And then also next week, the series doesn't end today. Next week on Tuesday, December 15th, Alonzo Paul is giving a talk on the grand story of Christmas. And then I myself will be giving a talk on the meaning of the incarnation on Thursday, December 17th. And we'll have our finale talk, which will be pre-recorded with Alonzo Paul and our Canadian artist, Sylvia Woods. And they'll be talking about the unseen and the seen. It will be a fascinating discussion about how Jesus melds those two worlds of the unseen and the seen together and through art. And so we're excited to have this series. Before I go any further, though, I want to make an announcement that we are having a free giveaway. And this is very exciting. The way to get entered into the draw for the free giveaway, we're giving away books and journals and pens and tea, and there's going to be a whole little package put together for you, is you must submit your questions. As soon as you submit your questions into the comment box on Facebook, then you'll be automatically entered to win. And at the end of this talk and after the Q&A, I will announce the winner. And so please be submitting your questions right now. You can put them in the comment box. And I think we're going to have a wonderful time. We're looking forward to your questions. So bring the questions. And now I'm going to hand it over to you, Daniel Gilman, our speaker for today. And we're really looking forward to what you have to say on a pagan Christmas.
Well, thank you, Basil, so much. And thank you, everyone who's taking your time. I know this time of 2020, people are, if you're anything like me, so tired of logging on to more Zoom calls and digital events, but you're here with us and we're grateful. I'm going to speak for just 15 minutes, and then the rest of our 45 minutes is going to be Q&A. And so please, even now, start submitting questions, whether it's about what I'm talking about or Christmas in general, or if you just have questions about faith, Bible, spirituality stuff, we'd love to hear your questions. You know, Christmas is, and the images of Christmas are so familiar to so many of us that we easily lose sight of how surprising and subversive the Christmas story really is. Now, I know that not everyone tuning in today is familiar with Christmas, and if you're not really familiar with Christmas or even the Christian story, we're really glad that you're with us. I want to invite those who are familiar with Christmas and those who are not so familiar to join me metaphorically on walking through a neighborhood. Just imagine it's before COVID. We don't have to socially distance. We're walking through a neighborhood, and you see this tacky nativity scene in your front yard. So I'm going to show you this photo right here. And this is something that even if you're not familiar with Christmas, you probably have seen. In a second, you'll see a photo of a nativity scene once Julie's able to post that on there. What you're going to see is going to be, you're going to see on one side of Mary and Joseph, you'll notice that there's typically shepherds. And that's because we have first-person eyewitness accounts that there were shepherds who actually came and were there at the shortly after the birth of Jesus. And that's a subject for another talk. You'll also probably notice that there's random animals there. What's that about? Well, that's because Mary didn't get to give birth to Jesus in a in a home or a hospital, but rather in kind of a throwaway stable. It might have even been a cave. Some are definitely where they like housed and fed animals. It was a messy place. That's why there's random animals there. And then you'll notice these real regal looking guys. And that's what we're talking about today. They're sometimes referred to as the three kings. So we actually don't know how many there were. There's multiple, that's for sure. And you'll also notice that they're sometimes referred to as the wise men. The most accurate translation of the word that's recorded for us in the first person eyewitness account in the Gospel of Matthew is magi. Oh, here we have the photo for you right there. You can see they're on I think that'd be the right of your screen. You can see these oriental looking guys. They're from the East, probably Persia, and we refer to them as magi. Now, if we look at the next illustration of the same type of nativity scene, you'll notice a star that's just right above that stable. And we can go back to the shot of myself if you want, so we can make some type of face-to-face connection. Thank you, Julie, for posting those pictures. The reason that the star is there is actually, I think, one of the most shocking and surprising elements of the Christmas story. Now, that might be surprising to you, that I think it's surprising, but I submit to you, if you just stay with us for a few minutes, you'll see why it's so subversive and shocking, and why we even have the title, A Pagan Christmas, for this talk. And the reason is that these magi who had come from very far away, they weren't Jewish, they did not live in Israel, they were probably pretty prestigious wise men, advisors to the kings, emperors in Babylon and in Persia. So they traveled very far to be there. And the first person eyewitness account in the Gospel of Matthew tells us that these magi, as they were searching the stars, they noticed this unusual star in the sky. Why were they searching for the stars? What tipped them off? Well, that's actually, from what we can tell, what magi do. In fact, in English, the word magic comes from the ancient word magi. And the reason that we have this word magic is that the magi were, as far as we can tell from scholars examining this, shows that the magi practiced a variety of spiritual practices. Some of that was, as far as we know, astrology, which is something forbidden in the Bible, as well as other types of engaging in magic. And I'm not talking about magic shows and the fun stuff. I mean, like, more of what some of you familiar with the Bible might recognize in what the priests to Pharaoh were doing when they were trying to conjure up some kind of miraculous miracles by their own dark powers. That seems, don't know for sure all the backstory of these magi that were at the feet of Jesus in this story, but we know that magi were people who engaged with magic and astrology and sometimes even sorcery, dark stuff. The Bible unequivocally forbids all three: astrology, magic, sorcery, all those types of things. The Bible is unequivocal in forbidding those things. The reason these magi would have noticed a star is that they were guys who studied the stars, not as astronomers, but astrologers, trying to divine the future and understand, illuminate insights by searching the stars. And as they're searching the stars, they see this star that, according to the Bible, God intentionally had there to catch their attention. And so they go and follow that star. Maybe it was something like how in the South, in the States, when during the slavery in the American South, people would follow the North Star as they try to navigate their way up to Canada, freedom. Maybe it was something like that, where they're trying to follow this star, and it leads them all the way to Jerusalem. Jerusalem was the capital of Israel. These magi had traveled far. They're there searching for that star. And somehow they had understood that this star was leading them to the birth of a king, of the long promised Jewish Messiah. And so they reach out to the powerful, prestigious people in Jerusalem, and they say, can you tell us more about this? And so the temple priests and scribes, they go searching in the Old Testament, in the prophets, and they find in the book of Micah this prophecy that the Jewish king, the prophesied king, would be born in this remote little town called Bethlehem. Not a prestigious place at all. Some of you are watching from Almont. It's kind of like Almont, Ontario. So no shade. So they continue on their journey, just not too far from Jerusalem. They get to Bethlehem, and they find Mary, Joseph, and Jesus. And the Bible records that they actually knelt down and worshiped Jesus. These prestigious Eastern magi bow their knee and worship him. is the language the Bible used. They worshiped him. And they give these very unique gifts to him, not typical baby gifts. It's actually quite an unusual story. And part of what's so unusual about it is that Jewish life was lived in a very Jewish world. Sure, the world was becoming a smaller place, and people were meeting people from different ethnicities, for sure. Jewish people in that time, 2,000 years ago, would definitely encounter Roman soldiers. They hated them, and they would interact with pagans here and there. But when it came to the sacred, Jewish people lived in a Jewish world. And this is illustrated perhaps better than anywhere else than in the makeup of the temple, that people who were not Jewish, Gentiles, were welcome to come and worship the God of the Bible, but only in the outermost parts of the temple. Only people who had become Jewish were able to actually go into the innermost, most sacred parts of the temple. Now here, where we have the most intimate and sacred moment so far in the Bible, God coming into the world through the person, the baby Jesus, right there in the presence of God made flesh, we have these Eastern pagan magi, these guys who most likely practiced the forbidden practice of astrology, get to be there. What a special and sacred moment. There's a couple things that we're going to pack in the next just couple minutes before we wrap up that we can see from this subversive, unusual use of a star to woo magi. The first is that when it comes to you and me, regardless of our political persuasion, our religious affiliation, or any of our core values, whether you're left wing, right wing, or like so many Canadians claim for ourselves that we're in the center, we don't typically want anyone to have anything to do with anything we disagree with. We don't want anyone, anywhere to deal with anything we disagree with. But God isn't like us. God refuses to stay within an echo chamber of our making. And so whereas you and I would think, hey, if astrology, if people shouldn't be searching the stars trying to divinate things, then what's God catching their attention with a star? That just sounds a little too much like an endorsement of astrology. God does not endorse astrology, but he loves those who practice astrology. He loves those who don't practice astrology. He loves every single one of us, which includes you and me. And God loves them so much that though we don't know how much they knew of the God of the Bible. We don't know if they were influenced by Daniel and Esther centuries before them and their presence in Persia. We don't know. But we do know that these magi were known for forbidden stuff. And God loves them so much that he breaks into their world, is speaking right into using like a vocabulary that they understand, stars, to catch their attention, to capture their imaginations, and to woo them to him. Notice that God doesn't catch their attention and then leave them where they are. He calls them to leave everything familiar to them. He calls them to leave their homes. He calls them to leave those who shared their worldview and their religion. He calls them out from all of that. And then the next thing is that they start searching the Bible for an answer to what they saw. And then notice that whereas if it was, well, me, like I love the God of the Bible. I'm convinced he's real, that he's really worth all that I am. And so I love the Bible. And if I have people who are practicing forbidden, toxic behaviors, pagan stuff, and they open up the Bible, I'm just so happy. But God doesn't settle for that. God doesn't want their religious activity simply. He draws them to the Bible, and then from the Bible leads them to Jesus. And that's the heartbeat of God, to lead you and me from all the behaviors and thought patterns that we engage with that are all about our own selves and own world, to lead us from that into the Bible, and from the Bible lead us to him. And God doesn't discriminate, but nor does he endorse the behaviors through which he speaks into as he calls us to himself. Does God still do this kind of thing today? Well, I submit to you, he absolutely does. And here's just a couple quick examples before I run out of time. One would be Lee Strobel. Some of you know him. Others are like, what's a Lee Strobel? Lee Strobel was a journalist. He was an atheist. and he really didn't like Christianity. He didn't like stuff of faith. He thought it was foolishness. Lee Strobel loved rationality and evidence and inductive reasoning, and he loved it so much and so thought it was antithetical to faith that he wanted to go and write a book that he could give to people who were people like me who believe there's a God, and he could help free us from our lack of rationality and engagement with evidence. So for him, evidence was so far from God. But as he started looking at the evidence to prove there is no God and that Jesus is a fraud, he actually ended up finding that evidence and rationality and the logic from that evidence led him to see that God is real. That the story, the so improbable story of God breaking to the world at the time of Christmas, not necessarily in December, but the birth of Jesus, and then that Jesus grew up, lived such a holy life, deserved no punishment, but died on a cross, and then came back to life. That as improbable as all that is, that the eyewitness first-person accounts all testify to it being real. And so Lee Strobel's love for evidence that had been something that he saw as pushing him away from faith ended up actually being the very means to which God wooed him to himself. But Lee Strobel didn't just stay in that place of just delighting the evidence. He opened up the scriptures, the Bible, read them, and there came to Jesus. A similar story is Francis Collins. Some of you know him, not from faith stuff, but you know him because he led the team that mapped the gnome. I'm not a science guy. I don't even really know what that means, to be honest, because science isn't my realm, but science is his realm and medicine. And it was while he was uncovering extraordinary discoveries and such a renowned award-winning gentleman that he began to encounter the beautiful intricacy within mathematics and within science, that he began to see that there just might be a God, a creator, a brilliant mind beyond matter that had made all that matters. Now, evidence, rationality, science, that kind of all might seem like a similar mind frame. But one last story before we bring it home, and that is C.S. Lewis. A lot of you know C.S. Lewis as the Christian author and speaker and the one who made the Chronicles of Narnia. But he wasn't always a Christian, by no means. He was an Oxford professor, and he actually had a lot of very personal beef with God. He was quite upset with the idea of God in light of some of the pain he'd been through as a child. And one day, he was a professor of literature. And one day he was waiting at the train station, which is what people in England do. And there was a bookshop, and he's a professor of literature, so he grabbed a fairy tale. He loved fairy tales. You may not know that there's actually a lot of paganism in fairy tales. And so he loved that, and he got on the train, started reading this book by George MacDonald. And he didn't know George MacDonald was a committed Christian. And in the intricacy of the fairy tale and the beauty of the telling, it's not an allegory for anything from the Bible, but there was something about the nature of the heartbeat of God that beat through the very pages of that fairy tale, that began C.S. Lewis's journey to wrestling with whether or not this God that George MacDonald loved is actually real and really worth all that we are. That's how God spoke, using the interests of C.S. Lewis, of Francis Collins, of Lee Strobel, to catch their attention and bring them to him. Now, it's not just our areas of interest that God speaks to us and woos us and introduces himself to us. It can also be in our moments of pain. And this is why this is such an important point to me. The Magi got to have their first kind of invitation to God, where God starts to woo them to himself through a star in the sky. My wife and I live in downtown Toronto. We're moments from the CN Tower. It's right there. We love Toronto. We're new to the city, but there's something I don't see a lot of in Toronto, and that's stars. It's easy for me to think, oh, there's no stars out tonight, but it has nothing to do with the lack of stars. It has everything to do with the light pollution. And I can't help but wonder if God is actually seeking to woo and win you and me to him, whether you're someone that doesn't believe in God and God's trying to catch your attention to introduce himself to you, or you're someone like me who has been a Christian for a long time, and yet your walk with God, as it sometimes happens with me, has grown a little bit stale. It's so familiar. And it's easy to think like, oh, I feel like God's just so far away, that God isn't really speaking into my life. But actually he is, but my life is so filled with the busyness, the metaphorical city lights, that I can't even catch a glimpse of what he's speaking to me. And that's why there's moments of pain that can be so special. And I wish I didn't have those moments, but I'll just share this one as we close. And that is, my wife and I got married a year ago, which was so precious. And then a few months later, this past spring, we found out that we're pregnant. And that's a dream come true. We're so excited. And then 8.5 weeks into the pregnancy, we found out that we lost our baby and we had a miscarriage. And that was painful. But that pain was sort of kind of washed away by the joy a few months later, finding out we were pregnant again. And that joy of finding we were pregnant again after such a loss was compounded with the how thankful we were because of what we've experienced before. But how much more devastating then when 8.5 weeks into this second pregnancy, just a couple months ago, we found out we had lost our baby. So this was the second time in 5 months. And just the way that stuff that worked out, I actually ended up being able to hold our little baby that second time after the baby was miscarried. I've been through painful stuff. This was the worst thing I've ever been through in my life. I'm just holding my precious dead embryo, my little baby. And this was a time, like the first time a few months ago, like in the first miscarriage, like I had felt like so much, I don't know, like resilience. But this time, all I felt was empty. I felt like I've loved God since I was a little baby, but I like wrestled with the evidence when I was younger and had come to such a firm faith, I'd say. But the second time, there was none of that firmness in me, just pain. In some ways, it felt like it was more sorrowful. In other ways, I felt like nothing. And then I was holding this baby, and there in a place where I didn't feel the stars shine or anything like that. There in that place that I held a little baby, like there was an intimacy, a closeness with the broken heart of God. There was a meaning to the Christmas story I encountered legit there holding this little baby. As I looked at this little, what looks to the human eye just like a little clump of cells, realizing that Jesus didn't break into the world as a brand new baby. He entered our world as an embryo, so vulnerable, so tiny. I can testify, so tiny. And as I held my own little child that had just passed away, there was just an intimacy with the heartbeat of God. Because the reason that Jesus came into the world, God the Son of God did, wasn't just to tell us a lot of good moral truths. So there's so much good moral truths that we can learn from his teaching. But he actually came into the world to die. I mentioned at the beginning about the unusual gifts from the Magi. Some of the gifts they gave Jesus at the birth, they weren't the cute birthday gifts that anyone puts on their baby registry, whether now or 2,000 years ago. They're actually burial gifts. Very bizarre to give a baby. But it's because somehow in their encounter of God, from the star through to the Bible, they somehow knew that he had come with a mission to die. And the Bible records for us, that's like 33 years later after the Christmas story, records for us that when Jesus died, that the veil in the temple, the most sacred part that only the Jewish priest can enter into, it was torn. And that act of tearing is like the act of grief where someone tears their robe like they used to do. And the impression is that it's the Father heart of God so broken for his dead child, his one and only son, Jesus, that he tears it. And the earth grew dark and there was an earthquake. It was all expressions of God's pain at the death of his son. Why would God the Father, why would God the Son, Jesus, why would they go through such pain of the cross? It's because the same reason that he put a star in the sky for the Magi, it's because God longs not just for those Magi, but for you and me and all the peoples of the earth to be able to come to him and not just see his face at that stable in Bethlehem, but to know his heart in the broken moments as well as in the busyness of our lives. God is longing for you and for me, for every one of us, whether we're tech support with RZAM watching, or it's my mom tuning in, or myself, or whoever you are watching. God longs for us to be able to, just like those Magi, not just catch a glimpse of his reality, but come to him, bow down and worship him, to have him as the center of our life, to surrender our full selves to him, to be able to receive his comfort like I did in our most painful moments, because even there he is. Well, thank you so much for listening. I went over time, but we're now, Basil will come back on the screen, and we would love to take whatever questions you have. I'll hand it over to Basil.
Well, thank you, Daniel, so much for sharing so vulnerably. I know that in my own heart, there were a lot of touch points with the things that you were bringing up in your story. And it's a reminder, too, that God is the God of all of creation. You know, he's the God of the stars. He's the God of truth. He's the God of all who is owed all worship. And then the vulnerable bits you shared, and people are writing in, praying for you, saying they're sorry for your loss. And we love that personal engagement. And we're seeing some questions coming in as well, really great questions. And so we're excited to get to those. And the first one we'll touch on is Randy Bushy. And he has the first question. Just a reminder, too, that if you enter a question, you will automatically be entered for the draw to win our prize. Okay, some books we're giving away, and a journal and pen, and some little package that we'll send to you. So keep the questions coming. It's really good to see this engagement. The first question from Randy Bushy says, the date of December 25th has some pagan history. Does that invalidate the celebration in some way, the way for contemporary Christ followers today? Maybe I should just repeat that last part of it. It says, does the pagan history of December 25th invalidate the celebration in some way for contemporary Christ followers?
Well, thank you, Randy, so much for your question. My family is Jewish, and my immediate brothers and sister parents, my whole little squad, have all become born-again believers in Jesus. But because of our Jewish background and our Jewish identity, I didn't grow up celebrating Christmas at all. And so that kind of gives me an interesting perspective of someone who's like been around Christianity for a while. But at the same time, my family was putting on a Christmas party once for some people in our friendship circle who were far away from their own families. So we put on Christmas for them. We had to do something most of you wouldn't have to do, which is to know how to celebrate Christmas. We had to like look up Christmas, you know, like I think this was before Wikipedia was a thing because I was a kid, but in a sense you had to like Wikipedia Christmas. And that's just, it's an interesting perspective I think I bring to it. I find sometimes that Christians will speak about the birth of Jesus as if we know like it's December 25th. A couple thoughts on that. One, we definitely do not know for sure that it was December 25th. As you know, there are other traditions within Christianity that celebrate Christmas every year on a different day. So we don't actually know when Jesus was born. Is it possible? Others might actually have a concrete answer. I haven't studied it. Is it possible that December 25th was this pagan holiday? I think most likely it probably was the pagan holiday that Christians were like, hey, let's, instead of celebrating paganism on that day, let's celebrate the birth of Jesus. I myself am very comfortable with that. And I think that the act of saying this is a day that has been special for us, but we want to instead make it about Jesus. I just don't see how there's anything wrong with that. If I ever caught one of my friends like worshiping the Christmas tree, I'd be like, that's weird and pagan, not okay. But I actually have never, and anyone I know who ever has a Christmas tree in their home, I don't think they're worshiping that thing at all. There's something, I just want to pause for a moment. There's just something absolutely humble, and even the Bible uses language of condescending about Jesus entering into our world. Even in the moments, the various quotes we have from God in the Bible, they would have been originally written in Hebrew or in Greek or something. But like Hebrew isn't the divine language. And so when God speaks to us, whether it's through biblical prophecy or in the very person of Jesus, so whether there's like human flesh is the stuff of decay, and human language is limited, finite, and just it's not the divine language. And so God speaking into our world shows his willingness to speak our language, to catch our attention and speak to us. And so I just think that it's a similar act when people take something that may have been pagan and then instead say, we're gonna we're going to actually make this a time for us to remember Jesus. I think that is, we need as many moments throughout our year to remember Jesus and to treasure the different parts of the story. So at least on my end, I'm real comfortable with celebrating Christmas, even if it was originally a pagan holiday. Basil, I'm kind of rambling. Anything you want to add?
Yeah, no, that's great. I really like what Logan said the other day, because lots of people, I think, have this question. And in different cultures, I've been to Africa several times, for example, when a lot of the people there don't know their birthday. And so the birth date itself is not what's significant necessarily, or not the one thing to hold on to, but the more important thing is that they were born. And they know they were born. And that is a historical fact. And the same goes for Christianity and for the birth of Christ, that Jesus was born. This is a historical fact. We don't know exactly what day still. If you're interested in a deeper dive, Michael Heiser, Dr. Michael Heiser, is a Christian scholar who's done a little bit of work in this area. And he puts the date a little bit differently. But nonetheless, we, as Daniel was saying, Christians can redeem culture and change the meaning of an event, just as Daniel changed the meaning with I think, God's help, of the sadness of the miscarriage. That now means something, not just loss, but also God coming alongside him now has changed the meaning of that sorrow into something where God's presence has been with him and his wife as a family. And I think the same thing, there's a pagan stamp on a date, but Christians have changed the meaning of that event to be significant. And the significant piece of that is the incarnation, that God himself comes to be one of us. And of course, paganism, I think, in one way to put it, is an inversion of the Christian narrative, where the creation, the created order, is worshipped instead of God himself, the creator himself. And so that's what's happening in the pagan holiday. And the true meaning of worship has been redeemed in Christ incarnating himself. And that's what we celebrate Christmas. So we appreciate those questions. And I see that Angeline is very active here as well. And she's got several questions. I think she's trying to double up on her hopefulness here to win the prize, maybe. But no, they're very important questions. And I like what she says here in her last question. And so I'm just going to go right to that one. And she talks about how God speaks to us in different ways. And in the Old Testament, he communicated through high priests. And then finally, he decided to come as a helpless baby. And so, but she says it's very difficult to have a relationship with a baby, or how do you have a relationship with God? And how do we know that we're in right relationship with him? I'd love for you to help us with that.
Yeah, well, thank you, Angeline. I appreciate your insights that you give at the start of this question, and then your actual question, how can we know we're in a right relationship with God? There's a couple points to this. First, I was reading a book about friendship, not even friendship with the divine, just friendship. And it said that you only really know someone if you know their friends. And we live in such a fragmented world that's so compartmentalized. We'll have our business friends, we have some church friends, we have our sports, children's stuff, and we don't really know each other. And because human life, there's different elements to kind of who we are and parts of us that come out when we're with different people. It's when we know each other's friends and each other's kind of world that we really get to know the fullness of someone. I share this with you because that's God's design for friendship and relationship. And that applies completely to our relationship with God. That a lot of us will try to engage with God just on our own. And there's a lot of reasons that's tempting. Just you and God, and just don't bother engaging in Christian community. But to really know God and have a healthy relationship with him, we actually need to know God's friends. We best are able to know that we're in a healthy relationship with him and have a robust friendship with him when we're engaging with him as in the context of both being alone with him in private and also living out our Christian faith with friends. And so if anybody's watching this and you're not engaging in church, it's hard because of the COVID online world today, but I want to encourage you to really prioritize having good Christian friends, and your encounters, your spirituality and all of this is through the grid of the local church. That's God's design. Secondly, just like these magi, they're developing a right relationship with God. The Bible is a big part of that journey to actually find Jesus. it continues even after we found him and to walk with him. And Christian, there's just so much different Christian thinking and theology, and sometimes it can really be have various threads that are unhealthy. And the way we're really able to discern what is true and right and to go deeper in our walk with God is to really be people of the Bible. And so I want to encourage everybody to be engaged in Christian community. And number two, also to be reading the Bible on your own and really wrestling with what it says. It'll give you greater discernment. Along those lines, my last point, read 1 John. 1 John was written regarding this very question of assurance of salvation, of confidence in your relationship with God. I want to encourage you to read 1 John and reread 1 John, maybe highlight things, take notes, and really that's such a good book in the Bible that directly answers your question with just greater divine insight than we have time to give you today.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Daniel. I think that's really important to just go to the scriptures too, and you're going to see things there that we can't, necessarily unpack in full here. And one add-on I want to say too is maybe just to normalize that question for you, Angeline, because we all experience that same sense of, how am I in relationship with this person? Even if it's my friend Daniel or my wife who I live with, sometimes I still have that question like, where are we at actually? I'm not really sure how deep this relationship is or where we're at in this relationship at this moment. And so there is a sense in which there is a normalcy to ask that question. And it is actually an indication of a healthy relationship that you're concerned about how you know that person and how well you know that person. And so as Daniel said, I encourage you to go to the scriptures. We have time for one very quick one. Can you do a quick one, Daniel? Sure. Brad Smith is asking, do we know what happened to the Magi after the Christmas story? Did the Magi take what they learned back to Persia with them? Was the gospel already in Persia before it was delivered by the apostles many years later? Great question, Brett.
Great question. I think long and short is I don't think we really know. Yeah.
Well, that was very short. Thank you, Daniel, for keeping it short. And it is tough to go in depth in this stuff, especially where there's very little historical tracking on the gospel's reach in Persia at that time period. But we do know there was a large diaspora community of Jewish people at the time of Jesus' birth. And so there could be some Jewish travelers who interacted with Jesus going back to Persia as well and taking the gospel there. We don't know, but we do know that down the road, as you mentioned there, Brad, that the gospel does reach Persia. And so we're thankful for that. And so unfortunately, that's our last question that we have time for now, but we're yeah.
1, 2. Wait, can I just, we can do another really rapid question. I think this is worth addressing. I think, do we have time? Not quite 45.
If it could, yeah, we have.
I got an email just before we got started because someone saw the invitation to talk on the Pagan Christmas and Magi and all that, and they're saying, hey, like, is this is God's use of a star? Are you trying to assert that he's endorsing astrology or something like that? And that's just a very fair question that can emerge not just in the one person who saw this, but others who are listening. So just really briefly, C.S. Lewis was very helpful in shaping my understanding of evil, which is that everything evil, everything that is toxic, everything the Bible forbids, including paganism and astrology and witchcraft, that they're all a perversion of something good. And so it's important for us as those of us on the call who are believers in God, Christians, to not ever just like seed a field of something just because there's an evil version of it. So astrology, like the trying to like do certain spiritual practices through this like pagan search of the stars, that is forbidden for very good reasons. It's not a healthy practice. But that doesn't make the realm of the stars something that is evil. And so the God is actually going to breathe the stars into existence. And people have perverted the beauty of the stars to try to do something spiritually unhealthy. And so that's why we're saying with a pagan Christmas that God was actually using the stuff that belongs to him, stars, to be able to speak into a pagan context and bring them out of that to Jesus. And he's able to do that into any context, in any context that never affirms that context or the practice of those who were doing that while they were there. Basil and I were chatting about this just before the call, and I mentioned there are people who, while they're doing a drug-induced, like crazy episode that's so unhealthy for their brain, let alone their soul, somehow God met them there. And that's not endorsement of drugs. That's endorsement of an affirmation of God's loving heart for every one of us, that no matter how far we are from God, that God has the power and the heart to try to catch not only our attention, but our very selves in his loving hands and bring us out of darkness into the light that is found as we come to Jesus. And so I hope that somehow, when talking about the pagans coming to Christmas, you see that we're not in any way endorsing paganism, but rather inviting all the peoples of the world, Jews, Gentiles, pagans, everybody, to come and find life in Jesus. Anyways, thanks for giving me one last answer to a question.
No, that was great. Thank you, Daniel, for sharing that. I think that's important to say too. And as I said before, your talk was fascinating and intriguing, and there were so many touch points with my own heart, and it brought emotion to the surface, and the questions like, what is that sort of light pollution in my own life, which is acting as a barrier to my own relationship with God, or to seeing things differently, or clarity, or God, where are the stars that you want to point and lead me in different directions in my life? And so to be more attuned to those things. And to be open. God, are you saying something? Are you leading me this way? And so it was wonderful to see that, and to see my own heart kind of perk up and go, oh, I better pay attention here. And so I hope that those who are listening and following along with us felt similar things. And if there is anything that came up where you would love prayer, then we would invite you to come to prayer@rzam.ca. And you can list your prayer requests. You can email us there, prayer@rzam.ca. And then if you want to just connect with us too, we'd love to connect with you. And the way to do that is to go to rzamconnect.org, rzamconnect.org. And then finally, we want to invite you to continue on this journey with us into our next series. Next Tuesday, 12 p.m. Eastern Time, Alonzo Paul is going to be talking about the grand story of Christianity. And I'm really excited for that talk. And then on Thursday, I myself will be giving a talk on the meaning of the incarnation and what it means for us today. And that'll be on Thursday, December 17th, again, 12 p.m. Eastern Time. And then our finale will be on Friday, December 18th. And that will be a pre-recorded talk, so there won't be live Q&A. But for the other sessions, you can do live Q&A. You can even email in your questions in advance, or even better, post them on Facebook, and we'll be taking them live. And so we're excited about the events coming up, and for you to join us with those. And now it's time for our giveaway prize, and we are delighted to give that prize to Brad. I think it was Brad Smith, is that right? Just looking for the name again, who asked that wonderful question. Yes, Brad Smith. So Brad, in order for you to appropriate your prize, then I'd invite you to email events@rzam.ca, events@rzam.ca. And if you give us your address, then we'll ship that out to you, and you can be blessed with this gift from the ministry. And we thank you, all of you, for engaging with your questions. And we pray God's blessing over you this Christmas season. Thank you very much for joining us, and we'll let you go. Bye for now.